Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2+ Tough, and today we are going to be doing a breakdown of the Spires. Now, forgive me, I had a bit of a break with Adepticon and some sickness and stuff like that. I meant to be doing these for a bit, but in this video, we're going to take a look at the complete army roster for the Spires. Not so much the artifacts and stuff like that. I want you to explore that on your own for the most part, but really taking a look at the models that exist, looking at each of the unit profiles, asking how they fit into the faction, what you can expect from them, basically some content to paint your Spires to as you think about what you want your army to be. So I have pulled up on my channel here, we're going to be doing a shared screen a lot, both the army builder, which makes visually showing the information a bit easier, as well as the actual PDF of the army booklet to get the army rules and stuff like that. Now, as I do these videos, the way that I structure them is essentially, we're going to talk about the heroes first and then move into the units. I'm only going to talk about the ones that have been released as of the time of recording, because there's so many unit entries to all these factions, it's just impossible to keep up. So I don't try. And the only real goal at the end of this is that you walk away having listened to content about your favorite army, as well as some ideas about ways to approach list building, army design, what they're good at, that kind of thing. Now, if you're new to all this and you want to jump into Conquest, Spire is a fantastic army to start with because I love the way that their synergies and buffs work. You can save 10% on all of your purchases by using the affiliate link in the description down below. Anytime you use that link, big or small, get your stuff from Bellum. They support me directly as a content creator, and I get a percentage of that sale, and it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, everything. Thank you so much to everyone who has already tried that link. But enough of the preamble, let's get to the rules. So the Spire, these guys are baller. If you're not really familiar, just at a high level, to give you the hyper quick lore version, aliens came to Earth. They were like pioneers and setting up, I guess colonists is probably a more accurate word. They came here and then trouble brewed on their home front and they were left derelict. Basically, their way home was destroyed and cut off, so they're on their own. But they are, of course, advanced species. They use Biomancer to mutate and create life to see their, basically whatever they need done, they're going to make a living thing to do it. And they're very cool. They kind of mix body horror with dark fantasy and aliens and all this kinds of things. So how is all of that represented on the table? That's always the question. When creating your army list, you may dedicate it to one of the 3 Spire sub-factions, because there are internal arguments within the Spire as an army. This represents those 3 of them. And it gains the respective Master's Touch ability. So Master's Touch is the army rule. You just pick one of your 3 different lineages type things. So let's go with the first one, Sovereign. He is the poster boy of the Spires, essentially the guy he's the mob boss who thinks he's on top. You can only have a Lineage Highborn or High Clone Executor as your general, or Warlord rather, that's the term. And they have superior creations. When selecting regiments for the Warlord's warband, you may increase the regiment's cost by 5 points per stand, and if you do so, that regiment's clash characteristic by +1 to a maximum of 3, and their evasion characteristic by +1 to a maximum of 2. That is awesome. What I like about it is you do not have to do it. It just gives you an upgrade option for your best troop, creating a situation where clash and evasion are both fantastic stats. So my understanding is that you cannot go, you can't spend 10 points and increase the clash by 2. It's just this, you can spend 5 points, get +1 to each of these stats to a maximum of what meaning a maximum of 3 clash, whatever. But, once it's on their actual scroll, then the game functions as normal. So let's say, for example, you have a Clash 2 unit, you give them this upgrade, now they're Clash 3. When they charge, they become inspired and they go to Clash 4. So that's kind of the idea. You can take someone who's not good at combat and then on paper make them pretty dang good. Next is the Directorate. These are the people underneath the Sovereign who are vying for control to make sure he's not like a solo dictator of the Spire. And they can only have Biomancers or High Clone Executors as personalized epigenetic triggers as their special rule. While this Warlord is on the battlefield, all regiments in your army gain the Burnout Draw event. However, only one regiment may resolve the Burnout Draw event each round. Regiments that already have the Burnout Draw event as part of their army list entry ignore this limitation. So if they already had it, they're not bound by the once per turn thing. It's just units that gain it and use it. So this is interesting. This is what one of my opponents did, who ran a fantastic Spires army at the last event that I went to at Adepticon, where it's, again, another thing you have in your back pocket. Burnout hurts you, but it gives you a major boost to your stat. So he was using this like, oh, I need a unit to go run and get an objective. I'll burn out. I'm not gonna die from it. You know, I know I'm gonna lose a few guys, but I can heal those up. There's healing in this army. That's great. Basically, it just gives you a back pocket option to swing above your weight class, and in an army where a lot of your dudes are disposable. I mean, they are there to be disposed of. So, you know, it feels good. Honestly, I like this. I rate it pretty highly just because of the versatility it gives. And the last one is the Underspire Pheromancer only. The Unnumbered Menagerie. While this Warlord's on the battlefield, all Force-Grown Drones, Onslaught Drones, and Stryx regiments in the army gain the Regeneration 4 draw event. Again, pairs real nicely with the burnout draw event. Again, you know, those things don't have it naturally, but there's ways to achieve burnout on these other units. So if you already have a built-in healing thing built, you know, in your faction, man, that's awesome. And what I love is that all Force-Grown Drones, Onslaught Drones, and Stryx regiments gain the Regeneration 4 draw event, meaning they don't, first of all, they don't have to choose to do it. If they want to be injured for some reason, that gives them a level of control. Also, there's no restrictions like the Directorate one where only one can use that draw event per round. All of them can, all of the time. That's pretty cool, if you like those models. If you like the Pheromancer, the drones, the whatever, lean into it. I've seen a lot of use of the Directorate one simply because of the on-the-fly decision-making options that it gives. Now, which lineage you can take is dictated by your Warlord, but of course, so are the supremacy abilities. This is a thing that every army has. So let's talk about these guys. So the first one is the Biomancer. Okay, this is sort of the seminal unit of the Spire. Biomancers are how they make their horrible creations. These are like the mad scientist leader. Provoke instability. Until the end of the round, when performing a clash action with a friendly regiment, if it is an infantry regiment, all stands in the regiment add 2 to their attack characteristic and suffer decay 3 special rule. Decay is another one where you can hurt yourself. If it's a cavalry or brute regiment, all stands add +3 to their attack characteristic and suffer decay 3. And if it's a monster, you get +4 to their attack characteristic and it suffers decay 6. Now what's interesting is the way that it essentially works is you just get more attacks the bigger your thing is, and of course it hurts you more. This has to be declared at the supremacy phase start, so you kind of need to know what you're going to be doing. This is the same thing as the Directorate ability, but you're going for a Hail Mary, because those things do stack, but it's gross. To be honest, I really wouldn't, because they all have different uniqueness. Like, for example, how many infantry regiments, or how many stands rather, benefit from this depends on who's alive that particular supremacy round, right? So it's a little bit of give and take there. You can count on these things, but it's not nearly as dependable as the flat bonuses you get from the Directorate as your army choice. I don't rate this one terribly highly. High Clone Executor, Coordinated Assault. Once per battle, during your first draw command card step of this round, draw and resolve the first 3 command cards of your stack as one draw, instead of drawing 1 command card. You draw 3 command cards, resolving the actions of each regiment fully, resolving each command card before moving on to the next, before your opponent draws their next command card. These activations may not result in any further drawing of command cards from your command stack, if their rules would normally allow to do so. So like, you can't draw a Biomancer that lets you then draw another command card kind of a thing. It's nope, just 3. But this is what my opponent used on me to devastating effect with Vanguard Infiltrate. Okay, basically he rolled up, had triggered this ability, and then had 3 rounds of shooting to just obliterate anything on the table in front. It was really cool. I rate this very highly, and the High Clone Executor can be taken in either of the 2 first ones, whether it's Sovereign Lineage because you want to pay for those upgrades ahead of time, or if you want to have fluidity on the battlefield, the Directorate giving you the burnout event. So it's a great idea. He's an awesome hero, great Warlord choice, stellar mod. Now the Lineage Highborn, which we'll talk about, they're basically constructs that royalty have put their brain into. They have Legacies of the Ark. When creating your army list, select 1 Lineage Highborn or Mimetic Assassin character in your army. That character stand may select up to 3 mutations at no additional points cost, instead of purchasing the number listed on their army list entry. So you get a hero and you get to do 3 particular mutations, which is their version of upgrades or whatever, and it just allows you to kit bash and customize so you can create the kind of hero you want. Now you're limited to Lineage Highborn, which is a beat stick melee, get in there and thrash things itself. So is the Mimetic Assassin, but it functions differently in an army. It's more like a scalpel attack rather than the Avatara, which can easily just be your main big line. Like these guys are gross. I like them a lot. And the last one here is the Pheromancer. Suppress survival instincts. While this character is on the battlefield, all friendly regiments within 12 may re-roll failed resolve tests. This supremacy is considered active. Minor buff there, but I do like the idea. You know, a re-roll is not super great because their resolve stats are generally pretty sad. So a re-roll, you're maybe going to pick up 1 or 2. I don't rate that one very high. I will say, unless you are stacking this with these Pheromancer specific lineage that we talked about before that gives them all healing events for draw events. The reason I do that is because between healing and resolve test, those are both different defensive mechanisms, and so when you stack them, you'll see, you know, gains over time, but like just to have this on its own, it doesn't do much for them. So those are the army rules, okay? We talked about those, we're gonna talk about them. Keep them in the back of your mind. We're gonna move now to talking about actual unit entries. Not talking about masteries or artifacts or whatever too much in this video. I want to go back and do dedicated videos for those because just it adds so much more runtime to these things. But we're going to go straight down the list here of heroes and talk about the different armies you can build, and then we'll cover the various regiments that are already available for sale. Starting first, of course, with the Biomancer. We have infantry. He's light, so that's important though, because some heroes can be used to cap objectives if they have a toe in. He cannot, so that's good to know. Draw events. He has Biotic Renewal. Roll a d6. This regiment heals a number of wounds equal to the result. If the regiment affected is not infantry, reduce the healing value to 3. Well, that's awesome. He's getting to put people back together as he exists. He also has a special rule called Mend Flesh. Combat and out of combat action. So this is something he has to choose to do, but target friendly regiment within 8 of this character stand heals for 2 wounds. A regiment cannot heal as a result of Mend Flesh more than once per round. So if you have stuff that gets him activate twice, he can't do it, but he gets, you know, how many times do you get command cards that you flip over and you're like, my Biomancer shakes his fist angrily but does nothing? More character actions I think is good for the game. I appreciate it. Even if it's just 2 wounds, it stacks with everything else, so awesome. Supremacy ability, we talked about that. Provoke instability, he can make people wig out and go nuts. Biomancies, these are his individual spell. Unstable enhancements, I'm gonna go over these very, very briefly. This essentially allows you to add decay to your unit to make them better. You get +2 to your march, +1 to your clash and volley. Now, if you do this and the directorate one, the decays do stack, so you have to keep that in mind. But it will allow you to take a unit of absolute nobodies and turn them into wrecking balls, which is exactly the idea. Harvest Essence was really fun to see in action. Target friendly regiment within 12 inches of the character that has not activated this round, so there has to be something you're taking away. The regiment selects to suffer either a -1 to its attack or defense characteristics until the rest of the round. Then, the regiment that this character stand is currently attached to adds +1 to the same characteristic until the end of the round. This is important because let's say you threw out a unit of force-grown drones that you know are going to die. They're just there to set the line of engagement. You do this to them, take away their defense or attack, whatever you need, but you don't care about them. Maybe their command card is on the bottom of your pile because you just are planning on them dying. They exist to hold the line. Well, you've already taken, you know, they haven't activated yet. You've already taken the stat that you need from them, and you get to keep it to the end of the round whether or not they die. So first time your opponent flips over a command card, maybe they delete that unit. You've already sapped the strength that you need to make the regiment that you're a part of much better. Now keep in mind, it's an awesome sounding spell. You do not want your Biomancer in combat. He's just not the guy you want there. He's a book nerd. So it has some limited use in terms of the attack one, but I do think the defense one is a smart play in a lot of the situations. Catalytic Rupture. Target friendly regiment within 12 inches of the character stand suffers d6 +1 hits. All enemy regiments in contact with that regiment also suffer the same number of hits. Hits or treated are being inflicted from the flank of the regiment and cause morale tests as normal. That is rough. I mean, that means that exact situation we talked about before where you've already stolen the essence of a regiment. You could also do this, which is if they get charged by a bunch of stuff and somehow don't die, you blow them up. You ignite the entire battlefield with them. That's so rad. I love it thematically too. There is Grant Virulence. Target friendly regiment within 12 inches of the character stand. The regiment gains Deadly Blades or Deadly Shot. Now these, they work the same, it's just one's for melee, one's whatever for shooting. But the way that they work is on a roll of a failed defense roll of a 6, meaning you fire, your opponent rolls their defenses. 6s cause 2 wounds instead of 1, and you just have to keep track of that for resolve purposes. But fantastic. I mean, it just makes, you know, some of these units can be massive in their numbers, so adding ways to get more dice on top of dice is cool. And lastly here is, let's see, Essence Transfer. Draw your next command card. If the regiment's within 12 inches of the character stand, exchange the command card at the bottom of the command stack with its regiment, with the regiment's command card. The regiment then acts. The character stand then proceeds with the rest of its activation. Now, when I first read this, I was like, that is a mouthful for something that kind of seems dumb. But it got used against me in a very clever way, and I enjoyed the heck out of it with my 4th round opponent at the Adepticon thing. Essentially, he set a trap where he would have these points where he's like, I'm not sure if the Biomancer should go or if somebody else should. So he creates these traps where he has Unit A at the bottom of his deck, Unit B scattered somewhere in the middle, and he gets to choose which one activates. So he kind of left himself open with a few different options, and it just, I don't know. It ended up being way cooler than I thought, but it's one that requires a bit of forethought, and that is not my forte. I'm more of a run forward and punch kind of guy, but it can set up cool scenes where you can do counterattacks because you get to know what units you have available to you. You know what is the next card in the command stack, and you know what card is the bottom. You just need to decide which one is which, you know, which you're going to use. Now, for his he has all the kinds of, you know, upgrades you would expect. Mutations is kind of their artifacts, masteries, retinues, that kind of stuff is all normal. Let's talk about his warband, okay? Why is the Biomancer so popular? He can take some really cool things. First of all, force-grown drones. Pretty ubiquitous. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, every single hero can take these guys, maybe except for one option. But they're just the generic troop. But that's wonderful because he doesn't want to be in combat, and honestly, neither do they, right? You can have a little 4-stand squad of him and a minimum-sized unit of 3, and they're just out there to cast spells and do whatever. Bound clones are also an option, just kind of an upgrade, a better infantry option, to be honest. But if you're going to invest in some of the other stuff you have here, you're going to want to keep him cheap. As for his restricted, because these guys represent the mad scientists, they get some of the coolest stuff. So Incarnate Sentinels are just living wrecking balls. They just want to pour in, you know, kind of get the enemy pinned down with force-grown drones and then roll over them with these guys. They are fantastic in combat, as we will see. You also have Desolation Drones, the Desolation Beast, and the Abomination. The Abomination, as we'll talk about, is a very powerful figure within this faction because although it's a heavy, meaning it comes in later in the game, it is speedy as all get out and will get there and mess things up in record time. It is a very unique creature in that regard in the game so far. So very, very cool. That's why a lot of people take. Next up is the High Clone Executor. Got a movement. I'm going to go through his stat line because quite frankly, it matters so much more than the Biomancers. That guy doesn't want to be anywhere near any combat. Anything that has to use the Biomancer stat line is sad, but the Executor, not so much. So he's got a movement of 6, volley 3, clash 3, 5 attacks, 4 wounds, 4 resolve, and 2 defense and 1 evade. That's actually a great stat line for a hero. Resolve 4 is always useful. You put him super wimpy units, you can kind of keep him around a bit longer. The rest of his stats they're just fine. They're great. Defensively not so oriented, but he's a great melee character for a base hero. His special rules are Flawless Strikes, which is if you roll a 1 when you are attacking somebody, the defense counts as 0, so it can be really swingy. It can either do everything or nothing. You want to roll those ones real bad, but it can create some salty situations if you roll to personal experience on that one. This means he is a decent enough melee character, is what I'm saying. There are mutations that can give him ranged weapons, which volley 3, he kind of acts as your general fighty hero, like low-level fighty hero. So in addition to those things, he can also choose tactic. The Wadroon have a lot of these that I enjoy, where you just basically pick an option from this list and it gives your guy a unique modifier to make them a little bit more, I don't know, your own. So the first one is Bastion. So any regiment that he's a part of, this draw event gives them +1 to their defense. So that's already fantastic for a lot of their guys. It's just good utility. Bastion's a wonderful just choice in general. He can also choose double time, which is if you do 2 March activations, or actions rather, you get a third for free. So if you put him with something heavy and they come onto the board late and you need to get them up the field into position to do something, you can't charge the turn you come in, but you can rocket up the side of it pretty aggressively. This is a great choice for that. And then tactic number 3, regiment gain loose formation. Now loose formation always counts as obscured from enemy volley action, so that's great defensively, and it cannot make use of the impact special rule, which really won't matter to him. And in addition, spells will only inflict half their number of hits. We don't care about that. This is the defensive one. It's obscuring. So if you were to put him, as we'll get to with his options, into a shooting unit, it makes them harder to reach, to kind of counter shoot. So moving into his options when it comes to his warband, he's got the bound clones, the force grown drones. So again, you have your cheapest chaff unit, your basic infantry is kind of what I'm considering the bound clones to be. Then they also have Vanguard clones, which we'll talk about later. They're a very interesting attacky unit. They're kind of like a melee hyper aggressive style of thing, more glass cannony than some of the other options available. But for his restricted, he gets brute drones, which are awesome. A lot of folks have them because they were in the old starter set. Desolation drones, marksman clones, your long ranged shooting. So again, you could give him a gun and then give the entire regiment that he's a part of obscured, so you don't have to worry about them, you know, in terms of getting shot back, and then you have to play defensively with your other unit. He has the Terrafons, rather. Don't know too much about those yet, but the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators are wonderful because they are extremely speedy, very aggressive, and they have a shooting attack. So they run up the board. This is a unit that has maximum benefits to scenario play, where you can set the line of engagement very far, hyper aggressively. So he's great with them. Next up is one of my faves, the Lineage Highborn. This is a brute type, meaning it's just one mega hero on a stand rather than a single little guy with a retinue or an entourage or whatever. This essentially represents a member of the aristocracy putting their brain into a construct and going to war in that because it's safer and they want to have fun. So for that, you get movement 7, volley 2, clash 3, 6 attacks, which is great, 6 wounds, resolve 4, defense 4, and evasion 2. So really leaning on a lot of those defensive stats. That's wonderful. Special rules, they get cleave 1, which is always good, and impact 3. So on a charge, they are nasty. Supremacy ability we talked about before. This is when you can either choose the Highborn or the Assassin to get different upgrades and stuff like that at no cost to you. So you can really customize these heroes a lot. But for their mainstay, they only have one choice, Avatara, which are the same thing as the Lineage Highborn. Big construct monsters. They come in a pack of 3. The Lineage Highborn can attach to them, and they're really nice. For their restricted options, though, there's a lot of choices. I really do hope that maybe 1 or 2 of these gets moved to mainstay, or they have something else. But so Centaur Avatara are a fantastic unit that are highly aggressive cavalry. It's sort of the heavy cavalry, if you will, of the Spires in general at the moment. Incarnate Sentinels, who we talked about before, big melee wrecking balls. The Leonine Avatara, which is very similar to the Centaur, but they focus more on speed and maneuverability than actual aggression. Terrafons and Siegebreaker Behemoths, which we don't have a whole lot of information on. We have their profile, but I mean in terms of sculpts and what they're going to look like. Then there is the Mimetic Assassin, one of the coolest and most interesting characters that exists out there. He's got a movement of 8, volley 2, clash 4, 5 attacks, 4 wounds, resolve 3, defense 0, and evasion 2. He cannot be your Warlord. That's a big deal. He is meant to be a small hero that wants to go out and issue challenges to other heroes. He's an assassin. Okay. For that, he gets a bunch of cool rules that are unique to him and make me dubious of people who think that they can start with him as a good first hero. You can't, because he can't be your Warlord. But basically what I'm saying is there's a lot to remember when it comes to the Mimetic Assassin. However, when used well, he is excellent and very scary. First of all, he's got flank, meaning he gets to come in whenever he wants, assuming it's, you know, his type of regiment's turn to come in. So if it's mediums, he can come in automatically the second it's time for mediums to start rolling. Flurry, he's going to reroll all of his attacks, which is fantastic. Quicksilver strikes. Basically, he resolves all of his dual actions first, and if they both have it, then it happens simultaneously. But he can ice heroes before they touch him, is what I'm saying. Chameleonic Epidermis. Once per round, This character stand may perform a free additional Seek New Escort during its activation. This character stand may seek a new escort even if the regiment it is currently attached to is engaged with enemy regiment, and a regiment then performs a free additional out-of-sequence fighting reform action to return to a legal formation. What this is essentially saying is you can have the clone lead Cheap Chaff into a fight. He gets to do, you know, his assassination run on whatever character, but if he stays alive, you can actually like move him to a different regiment and do the same thing again. It gives you an option to do that. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this rule. I would much rather have just a heavy melee guy who just pummels through enemies, but I understand that there's a lot of nuance to it. So certainly if you're fighting against like 100 Kingdoms or a mirror match with Spire where like getting rid of the wizards is a high priority, that's not a bad rule at all. And then Purity of Purpose. When this character stand performs a dual action, till the end of the action, each failed defense roll made by the enemy character stand causes 2 wounds instead of 1. It does not stack with Deadly Blade. So it essentially is Deadly Blades, but specifically in dual actions, which I like. This makes him a very unique hero that you have to have a plan for, more than any other hero. I mean, you should do that for all of them, no matter what faction you play, but he has such a niche role that like when you think about whether you need to bring him in reinforcements or where to place him as he comes in, really think about what his target is. That's going to dictate 90% of what he does that game. So keep that in mind. For his warband though, he is probably the most interesting hero in terms of its restrictions in that there are no restricted options. He can come in with one of 3 choices: Force-grown drones, again, your cheapest chaff; bound clones, your average troop; or Vanguard clones, sort of your aggressive melee versions of the Vanguard stuff. Personal opinion, I kind of like the idea of role-playing like him as with a group of assassins that he's leading. I would go Vanguard clones plus him. If nothing else, they probably stand a better chance of surviving long enough for him to slip out into a different regiment than, say, if he went with a minimum size squad of Force-grown drone. And for the last of the characters, we have the Pheromancer, the humble Pheromancer, lowest in the totem pole, but everybody has like 9 of them because they came in the starter set. So Pheromancer, another, I'm just going to put it out there, wizard option. You don't want him in combat in any way, shape, or form. But for his rules, he starts off, let's go stat line first. Movement 6, volley of 2, clash 2, attacks 2, wounds 4, resolve 3, not great, defense 1, evasion. But he is, evasion is his best stat and it caps at 2. Keep that in mind. Special rules: pheromone gland burst, combat and out of combat action that he can take. The target friendly regiment in 8 inches of this character stand adds +1 to either its march or resolve characteristic until the end of the round. A regiment cannot be the target of the pheromone gland action more than once per round, so it doesn't matter if you have multiple Pheromancers. But you just get to pick a dude as an action for him and +1 to your march or resolve characteristic. That's fantastic. I mean, no, it's just more levers to pull, optional things. Like, this does stack with all of the burnout draw events and army rules that increase your speed or whatever. We already talked about suppress survival instinct. You get to reroll failed resolve rolls for a couple of specific units that are like lore wise tied to the Pheromancer. And then he has his own set of spells, the Pheromancies. Essentially he puts pheromones out in the air and then like magic, the creatures they create respond to it in real time. So first one, Siphon Strength. Draw your next command card. If the regiment is within 12 inches of this character stand, place the card at the bottom of the command stack. The regiment adds +1 to its attacks characteristic and gains the Dread special rule until the end of the round. This character then proceeds with the rest of its activation. Now, it might seem weird to put a heavy hitter at the bottom of your command deck, but what this is allowing you to do is, like, let's say you and your opponent, you both start the round, both of you want priority because you're locked into melee, right? You as the Spire player can now say, well, I can try to get that command card, but hey, if he manages to kill that regiment before I would draw that command card, now I have a way of choosing a different... So what does this look like in practicality? Well, a good example is, have you ever had a unit in combat that you thought was going to die, and then it didn't? It happened to me multiple times this last event that I went to at Adepticon with my Flame Berserkers for Dweghome. I throw them like they're chaff, meant to set the line of engagement, but sometimes they just don't die, right? And that's real bad for my opponent. If you're ever in that kind of situation, you can then take that card and put it on the bottom of the stack so that when they do counterattack, they are extra gross. So it's like a good, if I I need it kind of ploy. You have to go into your turn thinking about it, you know, if you're going to use this spell or not, but it's an interesting way to kind of reassess your options mid-turn, which other factions can't really. Accelerated Hibernation. Draw your next command card. If the regiment is within 12 inches of the character stand, place that card at the bottom of the command stack. That regiment heals 4 wounds. So kind of the same thing, but instead of trying to position the card to make the most out of its, you know, increased aggression with the bonuses to damage before, now we're talking about heal. I know that this stand does not need to activate right now, so you know what they can do instead? They're just going to heal. And that's awesome. I like that. Pheromancer Drive. Draw your next command card. If the regiment is within 12 inches of the character stand, it acts immediately and may take 2 actions of the same type this round. And suffers Decay 3. Decay 4 if it's a brute or cavalry regiment, and Decay 6 if it's a monster. Special rule ends at the end of the round, and the character stand then proceeds with the rest of its activation. So it gets, again, you're applying Decay to something. Decay can stack, but so do the bonuses that come with it, as we talked about before. So this is a really important one because, again, if you have a unit within 12, you can make them swing above their weight class. And in this case, not in terms of modifying stats, but being able to chain the activations of your cards is huge. Induced Vigor. This is a fun one. Draw your next command card. If the regiment's within 12, the character stand, place it at the bottom of the command stack. We've seen this before with the other ones. The regiment gains the Tenacious special rule and re-rolls morale tests of 6 until the end of the round. This is, again, a very similar tool to the ones we've seen, but if you know a regiment is in combat, they're not in immediate danger, but other things could attack them. So you don't want to use the heal, because if they get attacked, you're going to lose those wounds over again and possibly break the unit. This is a different type of defensive buff. Their card goes to the bottom because you don't care about when they activate. They're just there to set the line. But that entire time, they now essentially, Tenacious lets you ignore 1 wound from a given attack, so it gives them a little bit of an edge there, and then reroll morale tests, which morale is not a big stat in this army. It tends to be pretty low, but, you know, if it doesn't cost you anything, like you're not giving up the lineage buff from before for those rerolls that are limited, this is one that's like, you'll find some uses for it sometimes for sure. And lastly, Pheromancer Compulsion. Draw your next command card. If the regiment's in 12 inches of this character stand, place it on the bottom of the command stack. The regiment loses the broken status and gains the benefits of the inspired special rule until the end of the round. The character stand then proceeds with the rest of its activation. Now, I like this one quite a bit, because basically being able to pick and choose when you remove the broken status is really important, because now in 2nd edition, Broken has a ton of extra rules with it that are crippling to an army. So that's immediately a good, I like that. But also, benefiting from Inspired is interesting, because what that could allow you to do, again, it's all situational, but if your regiment activates in combat and they are already inspired, you can clash with your inspired bonus and then charge the thing behind them. You can't attack them again, but you could do that, and that's crazy cool. And while this specific rule didn't happen to me, like the idea of some units getting inspired, starting with an inspired clash and then charging the second row, that did happen to me, and it's brutal. And so let's talk about the Pheromancer's warband. What can he bring? Well, of course he can bring force-grown drones. That's the cheap chaff everyone can. The Stryx, which are some really cool models that come out this last year. We'll talk about their entry. And Onslaught Drones as his mainstay, but then also for his restricted, he comes with brute drones. Again, a lot of people have these dudes from the starter set, and that's where they came in as well. Can also take Prowlers, which are sort of your light flanking unit. Think of them as kind of like the wolves for Nord. And then the Abomination, again, that big monster that is a centerpiece model that is awesome on the table. And so at this point, we're going to move into talking about the various regiments that these characters can take. Again, I'm going to try to remember to talk about which characters can take them. But at the end of the day, like, it's more important to remember the synergies that each of these characters bring. So it's not, I feel like with Spire, it's more about the levers you can pull with the Biomancer and the Pheromancer, all of that being shrouded under the High Clone Executor as your Warlord, who lets you once per game activate 3 cards at once. It is a brutal effect. I'm not kidding you. I was on the receiving end of it with 3 Vanguard Infiltrator clone units firing at me. It's miserable, like in a good way. Like it's their thing. And so I'll be highlighting some of those buffs and bonuses. Again, all of these things are just levers that you can can pull. You can pull a lever that gives burnout whatever a billion to a unit, but then they swing like a god and punch whatever they want. So it's a trade-off. All of these things are in varying amounts. All the bonuses you can control, you can heal, you can damage, but we're going to start talking about the regiments now. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the talk about the actual regiments that they can take. Just going to go in order with anything that has had a release. So if you want to keep up and follow along, that's exactly the order we're going to go in. So kicking it off with our big heavy monster, the Abomination. Movement 10. That's just like, that is a crowning achievement stat in this game. I adore the Abomination. It can just scrabble up the field. Again, it is a heavy, so it comes in later, but with movement 10, you're wherever you, if they do a move, they're wherever you want them to be for the next round. So I love this guy. Volley of 0, doesn't matter. He ain't here for shooting. Clash of 2, which is important, but we'll talk about his special rules. He's got some great stuff. 10 attacks, 10 wounds, resolve 4, which is wonderful, and then defense 3, 0 evasion, which makes sense. He's a big old boy. Cleave 1 lets him, basically tear through opponents a little bit easier. Flurry lets him re-roll all of his attacks, so if the Abomination can inspire and clash, they have a pretty good chance of doing some damage. Terrifying 1 is a negative modifier to the opponent's resolve stat, and Impact 5 means when the Abomination charges in, whether or not it makes a class action in the next round or not, it will get 5 impact attacks. So again, it's a big missile, but for 150 points, it's a big scary missile. It's really what the Abomination is, and I do like it quite a bit. It's interesting because while other regiments that we're going to talk about are actually scarier in terms of damage output and stuff like that, the Abomination just visually commands the visual space of the table, and so and if you ignore it, it will hurt you. Like, it is a gross unit. So it becomes a very interesting piece, both stat-wise and like almost psychologically. Then we have the Avatara clocking in at 165 points at this point. Now, they are a brute unit, medium, meaning they're going to be like just 3 guys. They all have the same stat lines. Medium means they're, for what they can do, that's a great size to have them at. So movement 7, so they move as fast as the Lineage Highborn. That's awesome. Volley of 0, Clash of 2, attacks 4, wounds 4, resolve 4, defense 4, evasion 2. So if you have not caught that theme, 4 is the best stat that they give you as a baseline thing. If you clash at clash value 4, or sorry, rather inspire at clash value 4, you get with re-rolling 6s or something like that. Like, it's crazy how good these guys are. The attacks, resolve, defense, and evasion are all spot on for a brute-sized unit. They look wonderful. Now, if they're special rules, they have Cleave 1. Again, getting through armor is great. Impact 2. If you've seen the models, they're pretty like stringy, so I was a bit surprised they got any impact at all. But they also have support 2, so they're going to be helping each other out in combat if you do decide to make them a bigger unit, or you get hit in the side or something like that. They don't really have much in the way of upgrades or officers or anything like that. Of course, if you put an avatar with them, their abilities, there's a lot of abilities that affect the regiment that they're attached to, so you can kind of upgrade them there. But realistically, these are a brute medium that just want to get in, and they do not die easily. So while I don't think that they are an amazing choice, they are certainly interesting if you are trying to bring the Lineage Highborn specifically, as well as like all the different Avatara that can go with them. For example, the Centaur Avatara, which we'll get here pretty soon. In fact, that's going to be a reoccurring theme in the Spires army roster, is like the units, like the more characters that can access a unit, the more uninteresting those units are. By that I mean, like, force-grown drones are just a shield wall. They exist to just hold objectives. They're not good at anything in particular other than being cheap. That's their advantage. But then you get something like the Avatara, where they might on the outset with Clash 2, only 4 attacks, they might not seem like a lot, but when you start upgrading them with the Lineage Highborn in them and the way that they can access other bigger, heavier things, they're more than they look like on paper. Is that probably the easiest way to say it. Next is the Bound Clones, infantry, medium, so they can actually get objectives, which is very important for this army because some of your best troops are not able to claim objectives. But they come in with a movement of 5, volley 0, clash 2, attacks 4, wounds 4, resolve of 2, which is real sad. Defense 2, evasion 1. And like I said, this is sort of your midline infantry unit. So again, that's why they can cap objectives. They also have shield, so they're functionally defense 3 from the front, and they do have support 2. So they are going to be in bigger groups, chipping in more dice to the attack. Where I like these guys though, is that this is when you start getting into officers. I think officers are a great part of the game where you can start to customize what units do, add some flavor to them. So let's go through these here. We have the Ward Preceptor, which adds Bastion. So now instead of defense 3 in the front, we're defense 4. That's wonderful. The Catabolic Node. Now, this is a mountain of text. I am basically going to summarize. You can take an officer that explodes. Okay, and let's see, you roll 2d6 and he rolls, let's see, the number of hits equal to 1 regiment is engaged with. So yeah, he explodes, he does 2d6 hits to a regiment that you're engaged with, and then whichever of those 2 dice is higher, let's say you rolled a 6 and a 4, so the total is 10 hits on the enemy. Whatever one is the higher number, you take that and you take that many hits. So realistically, even your best outcome is 2 6s, 12 damage on your opponent, 6 to you. It goes in the detail of how, the order of operations for this, but all in all, I honestly adore this. It was used on me in a game of First Blood with my buddy Rob locally, and I have been ecstatic about it ever since. Next up is the Assault Preceptor. The regiment adds +1 to its clash characteristic. In addition, while this officer is present, the regiment's command stand re-rolls failed hit rolls when performing a clash action. Now, I have thoughts on this. The regiment adds +1 to its attack characteristic, but now you have to roll the command stand separately because they get flurry. They re-rolled failed hit rolls, but they didn't give it that because then the whole regiment would have it. So I'm not the biggest fan of rules that make you have to create sub dice piles, but it is cool. Especially if you do something very simple, like you just have 1 stand's worth of dice that's a different color or something like that. Just re-roll those. There's ways around it, but this is for the wording purposes. It's not my fate. For the bound clones, I typically either like to do the way in terms of how it looks on paper. Ward Preceptor, Bastion is great. Bound clones have shield. You're leaning into their defensive aspects. Thumbs up. The Catalytic Node is cool just because things explode, but I don't feel like the Assault Preceptor ups their attacks enough to interest me in a big way. If they were clashed 3 or 4, we might be talking, but they're not high quality attacks, so adding 1 more per stand is not a standout thing. Next up are the Brute Drones. One of the blankest entries in all of the game. They are brutes, mediums, movement 6, volley 0, clash 2, attacks 5, wounds 5, resolve 4. That's awesome. They're too dumb to run away. Defense 3 and evasion 0. So what do you get for these? These are kind of your cavalry equivalents, light cavalry rather. Centaur Avatara fill the role of being the heavy cav. Anyway, Brute Drones, oblivious, so they don't take resolve tests as heavily as other units. So regiments with this special rule only receive 1 wound for every 2 failed morale tests, rounding up. I've been on the receiving end of that. It's gross because, I don't know. I like to get into melee with my armies, so when the resolve bonuses don't kind of meet what I'm hoping for, it gets sad. Sad panda sounds. Impact 3. Makes perfect sense. That's when you charge a regiment with these guys, they're going to do automatic hits. Not automatic hits, but hits that you get to roll for that are not part of an attack action. So they don't automatically go through. You still roll to hit them with the clash 2, but it gives you more options basically. There is Unstoppable, which allows them to reroll failed charge rolls, and Flurry, which is reroll failed hit rolls. All of these things go together to making these guys real stinking gross. Keep in mind, Flurry only specifically works when you're performing a duel action or a clash action, and impacts are not part of that action. They are part of a charge act. A lot of folks have these guys simply because they came in the starter set, and they are good. You just really want to make sure that they get the charge on your opponent rather than being charged. These are also great candidates for the maneuver I talked about earlier, where the Pheromancer can pick a regiment, give them, say, get rid of one of their effects, or give them a bonus to their attacks, move their stand to the bottom. You know that with re-rolling charges and hits and that kind of stuff, they can do damage. So as long as you leave them in a position where you don't mind them being the bottom card in your command stack, you could buff these guys pretty dang good. They're great. Next are the Centaur Avatara. A little pricey at $195, but like I said, this is your heavy mobile cavalry option. So you got a movement of 8 which is, again, as much as I praised speed for the Abomination, these guys do an equally good job almost. Volley 0. Clash of 3, which we've seen a lot of 2s lately, so Clash of 3 is real nice. 5 attacks, 5 wounds, 4 resolve, defense 3, and 1 evasion. These guys are stunning models. I talked about them, well, I guess that was their first edition incarnation, but they're kind of quad armed. They're centaurs because the Spire custom create any kind of warrior they need. So they made a centaur to have a mobile army. And then in the torso, there's actually 4 arms. 2 of them are holding swords. One's got a shield, one's got a spear. They're really, really cool. So as far as special rules go, let's break into this. Brutal Impact. If you're not familiar, Brutal Impact is essentially cleave, so it negatively modifies the defense roll of whatever you target, but it specifically functions on impact attacks. So the next rule, Impact 3, when a regiment of 3 of these guys charges, assuming they all make, contact with a stand, which is not hard to do in this game, you're going to be rolling 9 dice, and those 9 attacks trigger at Clash 3 and reduce the defense of whoever they charge by 2. I've been on the receiving end of this combination of rules from 100 Kingdoms. I don't like it, which means it's really good. They also, of course, have shield, so they're functionally defense 4 from the front. As I said, one of their arms has shield. I'm assuming to represent the many-armed nature of these guys swinging their swords. They also have flurry, so re-rolling hit rolls that are not related to impacts is great. And of course, they can take a leader, standard bearer, that kind of stuff. Standard bearer is important because it lets them re-roll charges. You are going to want that. It also gives them an extra inch on their second move action, which, move stat being a standout for them is, you lean into their strengths kind of a thing. So I would always take a standard bearer with these guys. I wouldn't leave home without it. It essentially makes them a wonderful flanking force between the defensive bonuses, the high resolve, the fact that they can get their own rerolls for attacks, shield, impact, brutal impact, the standard bearer. They're awesome. I just think that they're a wonderful flanking force that can act mostly independently. We're going to breeze right past the Desolation stuff because they don't have models to my knowledge, but talk about the humble Force-Grown Drones, some of the cheapest units to ever exist in this game. They are infantry, but they are also light, meaning they fill up a lot of the basic or core choices for these heroes, but they will never be able to cap an objective. Kind of keep that in mind. So with that, you get 3 stands of 4 dudes for 90 points. 90 points is awfully cheap. What do you get for that? Well, movement 5, not stellar, but not terrible. Volley 1, Clash 1, attacks 3. Those are all the saddest stats that I've ever seen in this game. Wounds of 4, resolve 1, defense 1, and evasion 0. So one of the things that as I was recording this whole session of going through the Spires, I kept talking about how bad their resolve and stuff was, and then the first several entries are like Avatara, which have 4s all around. They're great. They're great at a lot of things. Then we get to these guys, and you're like, you see what I mean? You see what I mean when I say Stiff Breeze kills this entire army? So for their special rules, in addition to all that, they have shield, so they are defense 2 from the front. So it is what it is. Unstoppable. They have a standard bearer basically built in, reroll failed charge rolls. The only reason you would take a standard bearer is if you wanted the +1 regiment to its second move action. So it's just not worth it for me. Stick with what they got. Purposefully mindless. While a character stand is attached to this regiment, the regiment always uses the highest resolve characteristic in the regiment, including modifiers, even when broken. So attaching a hero to these guys gives them a fighting chance when it comes to anything resolve related, which is important. They carry spears, so they have support too, which makes sense, I think. And for their officer options, they only have the guy who explodes, because these are, like I said, designed to be disposable dudes. Now, a lot of folks have a lot of these guys because they came, I think you got 2 or 3 regiments in the starter set, the old one. Personally, I like them for meeting the required or like the mainstay options for heroes, but not much more. They act as great speed bumps. They're a cheap way to get other cool units in, but they are here to die. So do not feel emotionally attached to these guys in any way, shape, or form. But even in looking at this, right, pretend that you had a regiment of, we'll say 6 stands, okay? So two healthy, thick ranks. They got support too, okay? And they're rerolling charge rolls. That's awesome. You can have a guy detonate once per game. That's also cool. And then when you think about with either the Pheromancer or the army lineage rules or the spells that we covered, think about how high you can get some of their stats knowing that they're going to have to take a decay roll from God, right? Like lots of decay, but also lots of bonuses. So the idea of these little force-grown drones for one turn being able to swing far above their weight class. A dude blows up in their ranks and they got bonuses to movement or clash or whatever it might be, and then they all die. Like, but that's the idea. They can do that. They can go toe-to-toe with something much scarier than them, but you know they're gonna go away, and as long as you plan for that, that's all right. Next we have the Incarnate Sentinels, which I think recently went from resin to plastic, if I'm not mistaken. They are brute, they are heavy, which one of the few heavy options we have in this army. Movement of 7, but they're still speedy. I like that. Volley of 1, clash 2, attacks 5, 6 wounds, and resolve 3, defense 4, evasion 1. So they're like a more speedy and attack focused version of Avatara. Yeah, it's kind of the way that I look at them. Maybe not more speedy, they have the same speed stat, but in terms of like their focus is much more on melee aggression. So cleave 2, which is awesome on these dudes, and impact 3. They don't have a whole lot in the way of other special rules, that's really it, but Cleave 2 and Impact 3 are both really dang good. And so if you just need some late game hammers to clear off, stuff from objectives, they're a good option. If you like the models, they're awesome. Personally, I also really like the Centaur Avatara over these guys, but that's a personal opinion. Much more to do with models than anything rules-wise. But you can see how, the flanking ability and the speed and aggression of the Centaur Avatara are kind of counterbalanced by Cleave 2, which is rarer and rarer in the game, and I love it, and Impact 3. So I think that they fill similar niches. It's just a matter of what you like more, what you think your army needs. Then we have the shooting side of the army, and this is really one of 2 main shooting units that the Spire have access to and can make amazing use of. So, Marksman Clones, infantry, and medium, so they can claim objectives. That's awesome. Movement to 5, volley 2, clash 1, attacks 4, wounds 4, resolve 2, defense 1, and evasion 0. Now, if the term marksman in their name did not allude this to you or clue you in, you don't want these guys in combat. Like, the rest of their stat line besides volley really shouldn't matter once you get past that. If you're looking at the rest of those numbers, something's gone horribly wrong. As far as their special rules go, each stand has Barrage 5. So at base, you're kicking in 16 shots, right? 5 per stand, and then 1 for the leader option at 22 inches. And remember, in 2nd edition, you don't take the penalty for firing outside of that. You just don't get a bonus attack, but that's still a good chunk of dice for some of these attacks. And they have an ability called Arcing Fire. Until the end of the round, when this regiment performs a take aim action, it may ignore line of sight when performing a volley action against an enemy regiment in its front arc. That's within line of sight of any friendly regiment. If it does so, it does not receive the normal +1 volley from the take aim action, and a regiment cannot make use of this while occupying garrison terrain. So what it means is you can essentially either choose to increase their volley with the take aim action, or you can do the take aim action, and instead of increasing the volley, it allows you to basically use anyone else's line of sight as they're attacking. That's in line of sight of any regiment. So it's just kind of a trade-off. There was one situation where this was used basically to ignore a big unit that they had trying to charge another unit, whatever like that. So they wanted to shoot at something in combat, but the negative modifiers from having a bigger thing in the way of the Marksman Clones was negated by being able to shoot over it, essentially. And while there's not an objective right or wrong, volley is awesome, arcing fire is awesome. I love that they give you the chance to choose what's more useful in this situation. Next, we have I think a relative newcomer to the Spire army, the Onslaught Drones. I don't really recall these guys too much when I was playing Spire, but infantry, medium, another basic troop choice. You have a movement of 5, volley 0, clash 2, 5 attacks, which is good, 4 wounds, resolve 2, defense 2, and evasion 0. First special rule is Line Breaker. A stand with this special rule ignores the shield special rule and bastion draw events when performing a clash or duel action. So if this is a good unit to take into your opponent's highly defensively buffed thing, it breezes right through it. All those rules that you spend a ton of points on, forget it. But that being said, they are also just another variant of a basic troop choice, because the only upgrade that they have is the catabolic node, meaning instead of having shield or support or whatever the various things that the basic other drones had, this is a much more like streamed down version, but their whole idea is like breaking defenses, right? Things that have invested points in it. Other than that, they're basically somewhere between force-grown drones and bound clones. But I mean, anytime I can take a catabolic node, I'm like, heck yeah, that sounds so much fun. Next up are the Stryx, another unit that was added, I believe, this last year in 2022. And they are an infantry unit and they are light. Okay, so again, no scoring objectives, but this is more of a skirmish unit. They want to get in the way. You can tell because even though they're light, they also have a movement of 10, which means what? A move action gets them dang near across the board, right? You see stuff like the Wadroon have the hunting packs that allow them to rocket regiments up the board. These guys are largely the same way. They have some great buffs, though, that I really like. So moving past the movement of 10, they also have volley of 1, clash 2, 4 attacks, 4 wounds, resolve 1, defense 1, evasion 2. So I like that. It's just a stat that's going to be pretty hard to get rid of. So for their special rules, let's see here. We have irregular, which is something that shows up in all these kinds of aggressive light beast models. Basically, these guys don't count for setting your reinforcement line, which doesn't so much matter for Spire because they have so many units with high speed that they can aggressively move up. It does matter when it comes to other ones like Dwegholm or whatever, where the reinforcement line is a core part of how that faction, runs. They have fly, meaning they can go over impassable terrain, and engaged units as long as they have enough room to make it past them. And then also lethal demise, which is a rule that I didn't know existed before I started playing Wadroon, but I love. And it's for every failed defense roll this regiment makes, so the more Stryx that die, the enemy regiment in contact with it suffers 1 hit for each wound suffered by this regiment. Doesn't benefit from any special rules or anything like that. And it's resolved in the enemy's front arc, meaning if they have anything like shield, it helps them. What that means is you have a bunch of light guys that they're made to die. That's all they do. They just rush forward and then you just hope that they die hard enough to kill whatever opposing light things your opponent has, and they probably can. And then our last 2 entries are the Vanguard units. These are the highly mobile, aggressive arm of your basic infantry. So we'll start with the Infiltrators. This is a notorious unit because they are so good at everything, but they're expensive. 180 points is a lot. Infantry, light, again, they're not capping objectives. That's important. Movement of 6, volley 3, clash 2, attacks 4, wounds 4, resolve 3, defense 1, and evasion 2. Now let's put some rules here stacking with them. We're going to pause right before we get to their ranged attack, but fluid formation allows you to do a free reform action at various points in your turn. This allows them to be highly mobile because they can pivot on the spot and basically just turn at will. In rank and flank games, movement is such a massive part of the game that having the ability at any time this regiment activates to get a free turn or a wheel or whatever is really big. So that's quite a good rule. And then Vanguard. When a regiment with this enters the battlefield from reinforcements, it can perform a free march action during its activation, provided that there's no one up in their face. So again, another regiment that has a good move stat. 6 is good move. I mean, compared to me and my Dwegholm with my 5, being able to have Vanguard move, and free move can get these guys wherever you want them to be. Now, they're also light. This is important because in the games that I have played against Spire, against some of the better players that I know, they'll often have infiltrators rush up the board very quickly with their ranged attacks, pepper you with gross amounts of fire, all buffed by stuff that the Spires can do from their other attacks and things, and then fall back because, again, they can reform to get into weird charge positions. They can just move backwards if they want to. They can do a lot. This is a regiment that, the skill cap of the player is really the deciding factor about how good they do. Of course, it's a dice game. Dice just fail you sometimes, but knowing how to use fluid formation and Vanguard effectively with their range stuff and still kind of keep your eye on the prize as far as objectives, remember they're light, it's a big deal. So good players love these guys and they love good players. As far as their actual attacks though, Barrage 6, which is a wonderful barrage. The dedicated archers shot 5, keep that in mind. So with this, you have, 19 shots, right? 6, 12, 18, 19 for the leader. Yeah, man. At 14-inch range. So Again, that first turn, they can reach out and touch most things between Vanguard and a range 14 attack. Yeah, and they have rapid volley, which is to say that a hit roll of 1, remember, you're rolling a bigger pool of dice than most of your opponents are with their shooting, so that's a big deal. Any hit roll of a 1 does 2 attacks. There's no special benefits to them or anything like that, but it just certainly makes everything much more deadly. When you think about abilities that give deadly shot, which we had mentioned before when we talked about some of the heroes, you can see why these guys are super gross. And our last regiment to talk about are the Vanguard Clones. Infantry, medium, so they can actually cap stuff, which is real nice. They kind of, I guess, work in tandem with the infiltrators, if you will. We got a movement of 6, volley 0, clash 2, 6 attacks, which is a great stat, 4 wounds, 3 resolve, 2 defense, and 2 evasion. So they're meant to be much more in the thick of it. Special rules, they have shield, so they're functionally defense 3 from the front, and they also have Vanguard. So again, Vanguard Clones, so they are mediums that can get where you want them to be. Now, consider this. In 2nd edition, you can always choose one regiment to come in. The earliest that you can choose a medium to come in is pretty early in the game, so you can get Vanguard Clones in, and who can take Vanguard Clones but some fantastic choices and characters. So you can rush a high clone Executor up the board to be in combat position. And what I'm saying is Vanguard Clones are awesome, and they facilitate bringing other heroes up the board way faster than you would normally be able to because they have the Vanguard. Now, as far as their options go, they can take a standard bearer. If you're going to have them do anything combat related, I take a standard bearer. Like shooting units, no. Anything that I think might want to charge is going to be taking one just for my own benefit. But they also have some officer options, and we talked about these before. The Ward Preceptor gives them Bastion, which means they're functionally defense 4, putting them on par with the other good defensive infantry options that we have. So that's cool. But then there's also that Assault Preceptor, and I said I didn't like him in the other regiment, the Bound Clones. But here's the deal. The Vanguard Clones are a different story because they lean into attacks as a stat. It didn't make much of a difference in the other regiment, but here going to 7 attacks, that's cool. And of course, you do still have to keep track of the command stand, rolling them separately, but it's gross. Again, pair this with Deadly Blades or something, where there's chances for your opponent to not have defensive rolls or chances to make your hits explode into 2. It's just the weight of dice that you can throw with some of these, more meaty units, things better than the force-grown drones, can really deliver a heck of a punch. Now, if you are someone who's just getting into the Spire and you're looking for kind of some direction, I'm going to be just very clear with you. I recommend the High Clone Executor and the Biomancer. Start there. Those are your 2 warbands, and then whatever one you think is interesting, make that your 3rd, right? Most armies are roughly 3 warbands, 2 to 3, depending on the price of the units and how big you can make them and whatever. But like in general, those 2 are very consistent. The Biomancer for all the buffs, the High Clone Executor for being able to control the battlefield. His supremacy ability is just amazing. Other regiments that stand out, so for your 3rd option for warband, pick something that looks cool. You like big monsters? Lineage Highborn. Big constructs, rather. The Lineage Highborn. Then you have the Pheromancer with all his monster menagerie. The Assassin, if you think that sounds cool. They all have their own various things, but these top 2 are always going to be solids. As we move down the regiments and talking about which ones that stand out there, really, you're going to have a lot of force-grown drones because they're easy to get a hold of. They're very cheap. They make great mainstay choices, so you can take the cool stuff that you like. But in general, regiments that you see a lot of, Vanguard Clone Infiltrators for the reason we talked about before. Very important to have those. I have also seen quite a few of, what are they called? The Abominations, of course. I talked about how great those monsters are. And Centaur Avatara is one that I think is a great choice for a flanking force, like a self-contained one, but I don't see it too terribly often. Anything else is going to be a matter of what you have access to or what you like. Again, Vanguard Infiltrators are great, so are Marksman Clones. I think they make a great base of an army, starting with them, filling out your mandatory stuff with drones, and then you can expand from there into whatever you think is really cool. So friends, those are going to be my thoughts on the Spire. We basically just walked through the entire army, took some time and kind of focused on each one. I hope quite frankly, that you enjoyed it. If you are a Spires player and you have some input you'd like to offer, one of the things I do here on the channel is I always pin the most helpful content for other players. So if you have corrections, pushback, whatever, please write them out as long as you're vaguely, polite about it. You're not going to call me, or readers a bunch of different names, I'll pin it to the top, and because I would love it as a resource. There's really just not enough talking about Conquest on the internet right now, so any kind of help I could appreciate it. But all in all, the Spires make for a very compelling army. You could go very elite with big stompy monsters, Lineage Highborn, Centaur Avatara, whatever you want to do. You could also go the other direction of just tons of dude spam, where all of your regiments are the cheapest, crummiest guys that are meant to be disposable and swinging above their weight class. I will also warn you though that this is an army that rewards skill. Like, if this is a casual faction and you're like, I don't play Conquest very often, but you know, maybe once every 2 months someone wants to get a game in, whatever. Unless you love this army aesthetically, it's a difficult one to start, because you have to get into the mindset of, as we went through with the spells and that kind of stuff, the order of your command cards, the triggering of them to effect, the order of operations with special effects, like the guy exploding, like all of those things take up mental bandwidth. But if this is the only army you play it a lot, or you just take the time to really study the rules, it is an exceptionally rewarding army because you can outwit your opponent by creating meaningful choices for yourself. Where you put the command cards, do you add one to the bottom, like that kind of stuff. You can make those regiments play in a very interesting way that other factions simply can't. There's a control element to Spire that no other faction quite has. Old Dominion has a lot of debuffs, but that's not the same thing as controlling the ebb and flow of the game. Also, everything is just fast, man. Like, the Nords also have speed, the Wadroon have quite a bit of speed, but it's speed mixed with the disposability of so many units, and that, like, their point cost into the way, like, everything's a glass cannon, but they're buffs and synergies and ways that you can make the glass cannon work in unique functions that no other army has. So anyway, friends, that's it for the Spire. Thank you so much for bearing with me in this super long video. I hope that you will have enjoyed yourself. Let me know what faction you would like covered next, and I'll get to that in my next Conquest faction review video. Thank you so much, and happy wargaming.